Hello, and welcome to Sleepy Starlight Channel. I'm so glad you're here tonight. Maybe your day was long, or maybe you're simply looking for a calm voice to help you unwind and drift into sleep. Tonight, we'll take a gentle journey where science becomes a story and curiosity leads us softly into dreams. There was a time when silence ruled the oceans, not the silence of peace, but the kind that follows a storm too vast to name. It was the first great stillness in the history of life, a moment when the pulse of the planet faltered and the rhythm that had been steady for hundreds of millions of years suddenly slowed. It did not happen in a day or even in a century. It was a silence that unfolded over millions of years, patient and absolute. Before that silence, the earth was alive with movement. The seas were crowded with trilobites, strange fish with armored heads, coral gardens spreading like cities beneath the waves. Land, too, had begun to green, the first forests, small and primitive, breathing new air into a world once ruled by water. The air shimmered with oxygen, and for a time it seemed that life had found its rhythm forever. But the earth, like all living things, changes its mind. Deep beneath the crust, something stirred, not an explosion, but a deep and quiet pressure. Tectonic plates shifted, volcanoes bloomed like wounds across the land, and the air began to change. Gases seeped upward, carbon dioxide, methane, sulfur. The balance tilted. The seas, which had once been blue and clear, grew thick with carbon and acid. Oxygen dwindled. Bacteria that once lived quietly in shadows now ruled the oceans again, filling the water with poisons that smothered everything larger. It was not a single death, but a wave, slow, unstoppable, indifferent. This was the late Devonian extinction, one of the first great endings in Earth's story. It began around 375 million years ago and stretched across ages. The world that followed the Devonian was older, stronger, and for a time at peace. Forests spread like continents of green. Insects grew to impossible size. Dragonflies with wings as wide as a hawk's. Millipedes that could brush your knees as they moved through the damp ferns. Reptiles ruled the land. Fish ruled the sea, and the air was thick with oxygen. It was an age of growth, of balance, of quiet power. But deep inside the planet, pressure was building again. The earth, though calm on the surface, had never stopped breathing fire. Around 252 million years ago, the quiet began to crack. In what is now Siberia, the crust opened like a wound, and fire poured out. For millions of years, lava flooded the land, not in violent explosions, but in steady waves, layer after layer. The Siberian traps, as we now call them, spread over an area larger than Europe. The eruptions released unimaginable quantities of gases, carbon dioxide, methane, sulfur. The air thickened, the seas began to warm, and slowly life began to suffocate. At first, it might have seemed subtle, a few coral species disappearing, then certain shellfish, then the reefs themselves. But as centuries turned to millennia, the chain reaction spread. Carbon built up in the atmosphere, trapping heat. Temperatures soared by several degrees. The oceans lost their oxygen and turned acidic. Microbes in the dark waters began to bloom and die in cycles, releasing even more methane, a feedback loop of warming and decay. Rain, once nourishing, turned corrosive, eating away at soil and rock, releasing more minerals into the poison sea. Everything was connected, and everything was collapsing. The Permian-Triassic extinction is sometimes called the Great Dying. It was not a single moment of destruction, but a prolonged unraveling. It erased almost 90% of all marine species and 70% of land animals. Forests burned and did not return for millions of years. The air itself became a slow weapon, unbreathable for many. Even insects, so adaptable, so ancient, nearly vanished. It was as if the planet had turned against its own creation. Yet beneath the devastation, there was no malice. The Earth was only shifting toward a new balance. The massive eruptions had changed the climate, the chemistry, the very metabolism of the planet. The biosphere had grown too lush, too oxygen-rich, too fragile. To restore equilibrium, the world had to unmake itself, to return to stillness before beginning again. Imagine standing on the edge of a Permian plain. The sky is orange and dense. Ash drifts down like slow snow. The rivers run dark, full of minerals leached from the burning land. Ferns collapse under their own heat. Forests hiss and vanish. The horizon glows with distant fires. In the seas, great reefs lie in ruin, and the water stirs sluggishly, its surface shimmering with oil-like films of bacterial bloom. There is no sound but wind and the crackle of distant thunder. The world feels both empty and endless, and yet, even in that silence, some things survive. Tiny creatures burrow deep in the soil, microbes that can live without oxygen, seeds sealed in the mud, waiting for gentler air. They do not know they are survivors. They only persist because that is what life does. It hides, it waits, it endures. The Earth never stops making room for what is small and patient. In the rock record, the line marking this extinction is unmistakable. Above the Permian layers, full of fossils, corals, shells, there's a dark boundary, thin as paper, rich in carbon and ash. Above it, the world is different. Fewer species, smaller bones, simpler plants. It is a geological scar, but also a signature of rebirth. After every collapse, the strata write a new chapter, and in the chapters that follow, we find the rise of new creatures, new forms, new worlds. After the Great Dying, Earth entered a long recovery, 5, 10, perhaps 15 million years of slow healing. Volcanoes quieted, the carbon faded from the sky, absorbed into stone and sea. Rain became soft again, washing the air clean. In that new light, small reptiles ventured out, amphibians crept from the shallows, and the first ancestors of dinosaurs began to walk. It was not a quick rebirth, it was a careful one. The Earth was learning how to balance again, this time with new rules. The oceans, stripped of complexity, filled first with simple life. Mollusks, ammonites, small fish. Corals were gone, so sponges and microbes took their place, building new kinds of reefs. It was not beauty in the old sense, it was resilience. Each new species was tougher, better suited to heat, drought, and change. Evolution had learned the rhythm of catastrophe. On land, the forests returned. Conifers rose where ferns once grew, their needles glinting in new sunlight. The soil was thinner, the rivers different, the insects fewer, but life continued. The survivors carried within them the strength of everything that had come before. They were the descendants of those who had endured the worst the earth could offer. In their DNA, the memory of fire became instruction: adapt, change, persist. And so, out of the ashes of the Permian came the age of dinosaurs. It began humbly, with small reptiles scurrying through scrublands and deserts. But from those beginnings came giants, creatures that would dominate land, air, and sea for the next 150 million years. The earth, once nearly lifeless, became a garden again. A different garden, yes, hotter, stranger, but alive. Scientists sometimes describe this event as a reset, but that word feels too mechanical. It was not a reset, it was a transformation. The planet did not forget its past, it integrated it. The chemistry of extinction became the chemistry of evolution. Iron from volcanic ash nourished new oceans. Carbon from ancient forests fueled new growth. Even the gases that once killed life helped shape a new climate where new life could thrive. The Great Dying is remembered as the worst extinction in Earth's history, but it was also the most instructive. It showed that life could survive nearly anything, that even when the world's surface turned against it, something within persisted. The resilience of the planet is not in its calmness, but in its cycles. Heat and cold, growth and decay, creation and silence, all parts of one endless rhythm. If you could stand on the shores of the Triassic dawn a few million years later, you would see a world remade. The air would be warm but breathable. The ground would shimmer with early plants, and walking through the ferns would be creatures with upright legs, with new lungs and bones that carried the memory of every extinction before them. The Earth was not recovering, it was evolving. The Permian taught the planet something profound, that endings are not punishments, they are recalibrations, deep, necessary pauses in the story of existence. The world cannot grow forever in one direction. It must fold back, cool, and reshape itself, just as the heart rests between beats. In the long silence after the Great Dying, the Earth was not broken. It was listening to itself. And when it finally spoke again, its voice was new, stronger, quieter, wiser. In the long quiet after the Great Dying, the world began to move again, not with thunder or storm, but with small, almost invisible motions, the trembling of leaves in new sunlight, the ripple of shallow water, the first soft steps of creatures returning to the open air. The earth had survived its fever, and now it was healing. The air was still strange, heavy with warmth, tinged with the scent of minerals and ash, but it was breathable again. Clouds gathered, rain fell, rivers found their way through land that had been scorched to stone. And in those rivers, life began to return. This was the Triassic period, the dawn after darkness. It was a time when everything was beginning again from near nothing. The continents were still joined in a single vast shape, Pangaea, a world both unified and desolate. Across its endless plains stretched deserts and red mountains, sandstones layered with iron dust from ancient eruptions. There were no thick forests yet, only clusters of hardy trees, conifers, cycads, ginkgos, their roots clutching thin soil. The air shimmered with heat, and winds carried the scent of salt from distant inland seas. The earth was learning to breathe again. In that emptiness, life moved carefully. The survivors of the Permian were small, reptiles with narrow heads and light bones, amphibians that clung to the shadows of rivers, insects that buzzed between sparse ferns. They were not rulers of the planet, but caretakers of its rebirth. They filled the world with motion once more, building slow chains of balance. Predators and prey, plants and pollinators, all began again from the same fragile beginnings. It was as though nature had forgotten its own language and was relearning each word. The climate was unpredictable, dry seasons that lasted years, broken by sudden floods. Yet in that instability lay opportunity. Creatures that could adapt, that could wait, that could travel far, began to thrive. Reptiles grew larger, leaner, faster. Some evolved to walk upright, freeing their limbs for speed and endurance. Others took to the water, their bodies reshaped into streamlined forms that glided through the warming seas. Every adaptation was an act of quiet defiance against extinction. In the oceans, life returned with brilliance. Ammonites, with their spiraled shells, drifted through the clear shallows. Corals, absent for millions of years, began to build new reefs, their fragile skeletons rising from the seabed like the bones of a reborn planet. Fish diversified again, filling every niche: hunters, scavengers, grazers. Plankton returned to the surface waters, catching sunlight and weaving energy back into the food web. From that invisible thread, photosynthesis, the entire world began to grow bright again. On land, the first true dinosaurs appeared. They were small at first, light-footed and cautious, little more than quick reptiles with long tails and alert eyes, but they carried within them something new, a kind of balance and coordination unseen before. Their hips allowed them to walk upright. Their lungs were efficient, their hearts strong. They were built not for mere survival, but for endurance. And in a world that demanded adaptability, endurance was the highest gift. Alongside them lived their relatives, crocodile-like creatures that dominated the rivers, early mammals no larger than mice, and flying reptiles gliding like shadows over the dunes. Each found its own place in this newly reopened stage. The earth, it seemed, was improvising, experimenting with forms and rhythms after the long pause. Every few million years, something new appeared, tested by climate and chance. Most vanished again, but some endured, passing their design forward into the next act of life's long play. The planet's surface reflected this restlessness. Volcanoes still rumbled along the seams of Pangaea. Earthquakes split ancient rocks, and rifts began to form, signs that the supercontinent would one day drift apart. But these were not violent ruptures. They were slow, graceful fractures, like cracks in cooling glass. From those rifts, new oceans would one day emerge, carrying warmth and rain to dry lands. Even destruction at this scale was part of creation. If you could stand on Pangaea in the middle of the Triassic, the view would be vast and strange. To the west, an endless desert glowed red beneath a copper sky. To the east, a shallow sea shimmered, dotted with islands of fern and ginkgo. Between them, rivers wound through valleys where strange creatures left delicate footprints in the mud. The air hummed with insects, the nights filled with the sound of distant thunder, the earth's new heartbeat. And in that rhythm was peace, not the peace of stillness, but of renewal. The great dying had stripped the planet to its essentials. Now life rebuilt itself from the ground up, guided by simplicity and patience. Where before the earth had been crowded and lush, now it was open and spare. That openness became the canvas on which evolution painted new possibilities. It was in this emptiness that dinosaurs began their slow ascent, not as conquerors, but as inheritors of resilience. The oceans, too, learned new songs. Where once they had been suffocating, they now shimmered with color. Microscopic life formed the base of new ecosystems, and with time, predators grew to hunt them. Ichthyosaurs, long-bodied marine reptiles, cut through the water like silver blades. Their eyes were enormous, their movements graceful. They were among the first true masters of the sea after the collapse, and their success was proof that the planet had found its rhythm again. Everywhere on Earth, the same lesson echoed: balance returns, but never in the same form. The world does not rebuild what it loses. It builds something new from what remains. The Triassic Earth was not the same planet that had died in the Permian. It was younger again, lighter, more inventive. It was a world that had learned to live differently, leaner, more flexible, more enduring. This was the age when life reinvented itself. Warm-bloodedness appeared in some reptiles, new ways of breathing, faster metabolisms. plants developed seeds that could wade through drought. Animals learned to give birth on land instead of in water. Every adaptation was a whisper of the same message. The planet remembers how to survive. Toward the end of the Triassic, the balance tipped once more. Volcanic activity increased again, splitting the supercontinent. The air thickened with ash. The seas warmed. Another extinction, smaller but sharp, swept through the world, clearing the stage once more. Many of the early reptiles vanished, leaving the dinosaurs and small mammals to rise higher. The pattern repeated: destruction, silence, renewal. But now the pauses were shorter and the recovery faster. Life was learning the tempo of change. By the time the Triassic ended, the Earth was a different place. The air was alive with flying reptiles, the seas with great swimmers, and the land with creatures that walked upright and confident beneath vast skies. The forests had thickened again, and the soil had darkened with organic life. The world had regained its color. What had once been silence was now symphony. In the Great Book of Time, the Triassic chapter is short but luminous. It tells of the planet's endurance, of how even after its greatest fall, it found a way to rise, not through force, but through patience. The Earth did not rush its recovery. It listened, it adapted, it waited for balance to return. And when it did, the results were astonishing. A world of giants and birds, of forests and coral, of thunder and light. Every extinction writes a lesson, and the Triassic's was simple. Life does not fear endings. It transforms through them. For more than 100 million years after the Triassic dawn, the Earth flourished again. The age of dinosaurs was not just an era of dominance, it was an era of balance. Forests spread across every continent. Shallow seas shimmered with coral and ammonite. The air was warm, the poles green, the skies filled with wings. From tiny feathered hunters to massive plant eaters that shaped entire ecosystems, life seemed unshakable. The planet, once scarred by fire and acid, had healed completely. Everywhere there was motion and sound. Leaves brushed against tails as long as rivers. Wings beat against humid air. Insects hummed in the golden haze of evening. Even the oceans sang. Whales had not yet evolved, but the great marine reptiles, the mosasaurs and plesiosaurs, ruled the deep with their quiet power. The Earth was alive in 1,000 rhythms, and it seemed eternal. But eternity on this planet is an illusion written in sand. 66 million years ago, the world changed again, suddenly, completely, and forever. It began not with fire, but with light. A point of brightness appeared in the sky, faint at first, then growing, then blinding. It was an asteroid 6 miles wide, traveling faster than sound could ever carry, faster than thought. When it struck the shallow sea near the Yucatan Peninsula, the world shook as if its heart had stopped. The impact released more energy than all the volcanoes on Earth combined. A column of light shot into the sky, brighter than the sun, followed by darkness deeper than night. In a moment, forests ignited. Tsunamis swept across continents, the air filled with dust and vaporized rock, blocking sunlight from reaching the ground. Day became twilight, and twilight became years of cold. The great creatures that had ruled the world, the dinosaurs, the flying reptiles, the vast ocean hunters, found themselves in a silence they had never known. Plants withered. The food chains that had taken millions of years to form unraveled in weeks. It is easy to imagine the event as pure destruction, and it was. But even in that moment, the seeds of renewal were being sown. When the fires burned out and the skies began to clear, what remained were not empty ruins, but possibilities. Beneath the ash, small creatures stirred. Mammals, tiny, warm-blooded, once living in shadows, began to emerge. They had survived the heat by burrowing, by hiding, by waiting. When the giants fell, the small inherited the world. The Cretaceous Paleogene extinction was the last of Earth's great natural cataclysms, the final chapter of the age of reptiles and the prologue of the age of mammals. It was more than an ending. It was a transfer of balance. For the first time in hundreds of millions of years, the skies belonged to birds, the land to small, clever creatures who nursed their young and lived in family groups. The forests returned slowly, nourished by the minerals in the ash. Flowers bloomed again, insects pollinated, and the cycle of color returned to the world. Scientists studying this event find its signature everywhere: a thin layer of clay rich in iridium, a metal rare on Earth but common in asteroids. It is the planet's memory of the collision, preserved in stone. Above that line, the fossils change. The old forms vanish, replaced by new mammals, birds, and the ancestors of what would one day become us. From space, the Earth must have looked the same, still blue and white, but within that beauty, everything had changed. In the oceans, too, life began again from near nothing. The great marine reptiles were gone, but smaller fish and plankton survived. When sunlight finally returned, photosynthesis resumed, and the base of the food chain rebuilt itself. Coral reefs, once devastated, began to spread again in shallow seas. The rhythm of waves, paused by catastrophe, resumed its eternal cadence. Even the chemical balance of the ocean, acidified by dust and rain, found equilibrium again within a few million years. The planet healed itself not by forgetting, but by continuing. The dinosaurs did not disappear entirely. Their smallest descendants, birds, took to the air with new grace. Their bones grew lighter, their hearts faster, their songs brighter. They carried forward the memory of their ancestors in feather and flight. And in the air, the Earth story continued, sung in new voices. On land, the survivors multiplied. Mammals filled the forests and plains, diversifying in form and purpose. Grazers, hunters, climbers, swimmers. In them, intelligence began to bloom in subtle ways: cooperation, memory, curiosity. Extinction had cleared the world not only for new bodies, but for new minds. The warmth of blood and the complexity of care became the new rhythm of life. The Earth itself changed shape too. Continents drifted farther apart, oceans widened, climates diversified. Where once the world had been unified and tropical, now it grew varied: jungles, deserts, tundra. Diversity became resilience. It was as if the planet had learned that strength comes not from uniformity, but from difference. If you could walk the Earth 1,000,000 years after the impact, you would find quiet. Forests would be young, filled with the rustle of leaves and the songs of new birds. Small animals would dart through undergrowth, cautious but unafraid. The scars of the crater would be softened by wind and time. The sun would rise as it always had, indifferent yet nurturing. The world had begun again. The Mesozoic age, the age of reptiles, ended not with extinction alone, but with transition. Every death cleared space for life that was smaller, faster, more adaptable. The warm-blooded rhythm that began with the Triassic's experiments became the heartbeat of a new world. And within that heartbeat lay potential, not only for survival, but for reflection. The asteroid did not destroy life. It rebalanced it. It reminded the Earth that existence is not static. It breathes, contracts, and expands. Even in loss, there is creation. Even in darkness, there is renewal. The quiet after the impact was not emptiness. It was opportunity. In the millions of years that followed, the Earth filled with mammals, forests, and birds. The planet's song grew more complex again, softer, perhaps, but more intelligent. And one day, far in the future, one species would look up at the night sky, see the faint streak of a meteor, and wonder. They would ask why the world had almost ended and how it had begun again. They would find in that story not fear, but awe. For every extinction, no matter how final it seems, carries the same truth. The Earth does not die, it changes form. The silence that follows destruction is not void, it is incubation. And when the light returns, the planet breathes again, wiser, quieter, endlessly resilient. When the fires of the ancient world faded, the Earth began to dream of ice. It was a slow transformation, not a sudden chill, but a quiet cooling that took millions of years to unfold. The continents drifted to new latitudes, mountains rose and weathered, and the balance of air and ocean shifted once more. The warmth that had carried dinosaurs and tropical forests to the poles began to wane. The planet exhaled, long and slow, and with that breath came winter. At first, it was a thin frost on distant peaks. Then glaciers began to crawl down from the highlands, carving valleys like patient sculptors. Seas fell as water locked itself into crystal. Forests withdrew, deserts widened, and winds began to sing colder songs across the plains. It was not death, not this time, but a rhythm, a heartbeat slowed to its calmest pace. The ice ages were not one long freeze, but a cycle of breath. For millions of years, the planet shifted between warm interludes and frozen epochs, each pulse tied to the delicate mathematics of its orbit and tilt. Sometimes the Earth leaned closer to the sun, basking in brief warmth. Then it tilted away, the light grew faint, and glaciers crept outward again. The planet's own motion wrote the seasons of deep time. When the great sheets of ice advanced, they covered continents in silence. Everything slowed. Rivers froze in place. Mountains bowed under the weight, and beneath the miles of ice, the rock itself groaned like an old memory. The world became a landscape of light and stillness, pale skies, mirrored plains, horizons drawn in silver. It was harsh, but also beautiful in a way few worlds could be. Pure, measured, eternal. Life did not vanish beneath the frost. It adapted. Beneath glaciers, mosses and lichens clung to pockets of warmth. In the oceans, plankton and fish followed narrow corridors of liquid water. Woolly mammoths, reindeer, and bison roamed the tundra, their fur glowing golden under the low sun. Even humans, latecomers to the story, learned to live by the rhythm of ice and thaw. Caves became shelters, fire became memory, and with every retreat of the glaciers, the world was rewritten. Each thaw brought renewal. When the ice receded, it left behind rich soil, rivers, and valleys carved with precision. The meltwater filled lakes and seas, and the land blossomed again. Forests spread where once there had been only snow. The balance between freezing and thawing became a kind of planetary heartbeat, slow but full of purpose. The Earth was learning a new kind of resilience, not to resist change, but to move with it. From space, the shifting patterns of ice looked like breathing, expansion and contraction, inhale and exhale. Even the oceans responded. Currents shifted, temperatures balanced, and winds carried nutrients from pole to equator. The ice was not an enemy of life, it was its sculptor. It shaped the world we know, the basins of great lakes, the lines of coast, the plains of fertile soil. The continents, once harsh and raw, were softened and renewed by the patient work of frost. During these cold epochs, extinction returned, but this time quietly. Species rose and fell not in sudden catastrophe, but in the gentle pressure of change. Some could not migrate fast enough, others could not bear the hunger of long winters, but many endured. The mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed cats, and giant sloths became the new giants of the age, reminders that even in hardship, life seeks grandeur. They moved across the frozen steppes with the dignity of survivors, and though their time would pass, they left echoes that still linger in our imagination. The ice itself spoke in patterns, layers built year by year, recording the chemistry of the air, the rhythm of the seasons, the breath of volcanoes. Trapped within the glaciers were tiny bubbles of ancient atmosphere, the planet's diaries written in frost. When humans would one day read them, they would find not only numbers, but emotions, the pulse of warmth, the sigh of cold, the perfect fragile balance that held the world steady for millions of years. The Pleistocene epoch, the most recent of these icy chapters, carried both beauty and fragility. It was the time when humanity rose, when small bands of people crossed continents beneath pale skies, following the slow retreat of the glaciers. They watched as the mammoths roamed, hunted the caribou, painted on cave walls, and told stories by firelight about stars reflected in the snow. To them, the ice was not an extinction, but a teacher. It taught patience, endurance, and adaptation, the same lessons life had been learning since the beginning. But the ice had its rhythm, and rhythms always change. About 12,000 years ago, the great glaciers began their final retreat. The air warmed, the seas rose, and the world filled again with color and sound. The mammoths vanished, the great cats faded, and the tundra gave way to forest. For the first time in millions of years, the earth found itself between extremes, neither frozen nor fiery, but calm. It was a rare and delicate balance, one that would allow civilization to bloom. The Ice Age did not end because the planet tired of cold, but because its cycle had completed. The same subtle shifts in orbit that had once summoned glaciers now held them back. The Earth entered an interlude, a long, temperate pause that would last for millennia. The ice had retreated, but its lessons remained. The rivers it carved still flow, the valleys it formed still cradle cities, the soil it left still feeds us. Even now, every field and forest is a gift from the patience of glaciers. In the great scale of time, the ice ages were gentle compared to the cataclysms before them. They did not erase, they refined. They reminded the earth that life thrives not in chaos, but in rhythm. And perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all the ancient extinctions, that survival is not resistance, but harmony. To change with the planet, not against it. To accept endings as preludes, to rest between movements. The cold, for all its severity, gave the world balance. It sculpted mountains into calm. Silhouettes taught forests how to wait and showed humanity how to endure. Even now, as the planet warms once again, the echo of that ancient rhythm remains within the air, within the oceans, within us. It hums beneath our seasons, beneath our hearts, a reminder that every thaw follows a freeze and every ending carries the seed of renewal. The age of ice was not a silence after destruction, but a whisper before awakening. And from that whisper, the world learned the meaning of calm. When the glaciers finally began to fade, the world woke to green. The great sheets of ice, which had ruled the continents for ages, retreated toward the poles, leaving behind rivers that sparkled like new veins across the land. The air softened. The soil, freshly uncovered, grew rich from centuries of minerals. Forests spread northward, painting the continents with color once more. The long winter of the earth had ended. and in its place came a slow and luminous spring. But not all who had endured the cold could live in the warmth that followed. The giants of the Ice Age, the mammoths, mastodons, woolly rhinos, giant ground sloths, and saber-toothed cats, had been shaped by frost and hunger. They carried thick coats and vast bodies designed to hold heat to survive the long silences of snow. When the cold withdrew, their strength became burden. The grasses they fed on changed, the forests closed in, and their ancient trails became rivers and marshes. Their time, which had lasted for hundreds of thousands of years, began to fade. The air was changing too. Where glaciers had stood, oceans now rose. Sea levels climbed, swallowing coasts and reshaping continents. Bridges of land, once highways for life, disappeared beneath the waves. The world became an archipelago of new beginnings. Species that had once roamed freely were now separated by distance and water, isolated and alone. And in that isolation, many of them vanished. But it was not only the Earth's warming that ended their reign. Another presence had appeared, small, clever, and full of fire. Humans had spread from Africa into every corner of the world, following the retreating glaciers, moving through open plains and forested valleys. They carried tools of stone and bone, weapons tipped with thought. They had learned to hunt not only for survival, but with strategy, patience, and cooperation. Everywhere they went, the great animals met their match. It was not always violence. Sometimes it was competition for food, for land, for time. Humans burned fields to flush out prey, reshaped forests with fire, and left trails of change wherever they settled. To the mammoths and giant bison, the newcomers must have seemed like shadows with strange power, fragile in form, yet unstoppable in intent. No single hunt ended the age of giants, but thousands of small fires, thousands of quiet pursuits tilted the balance. Within a few thousand years, a heartbeat in geological time, the world grew quieter. In North America, the mammoths vanished. In Australia, the giant marsupials disappeared. In Europe and Asia, the last woolly rhinos fell. On distant islands, enormous birds that had never known fear were gone before they could learn it. It was the first extinction in which the cause was not only climate or volcano or asteroid, but will. A species had become a force of nature. The Earth did not punish humanity for this. It simply adjusted as it always had. Where mammoths once walked, forests thickened. Where bison herds had thundered, grasslands grew still and soft. Predators disappeared and new balances emerged. The world was learning a new rhythm, one in which thought, not size, shaped destiny. Yet the loss of the giants left a deep echo. Without them, the landscapes changed in subtle but lasting ways. The great herds that had once churned the soil, spread seeds, and carved paths were gone. Grasslands became forests, forests turned to bogs, rivers shifted courses, and even the carbon of the atmosphere changed. The planet felt their absence. It was not only life that vanished, it was the movement of life, the pulse that had kept ecosystems open and alive. Somewhere on the tundras of Siberia, a few small herds of mammoths survived longer than the rest. They lived on Wrangel Island, surrounded by sea and wind, cut off from the world. For thousands of years they endured, smaller now, quieter, their bones thinner, their coats lighter. But even they could not escape time. When the sea levels rose further and the climate warmed again, their grasses vanished, and with them, the last echoes of an age. Their story ended not with a bang, but with a breath, the kind that leaves only snow and silence behind. But the echo of the giants never fully disappeared. Their bones remained in the earth, their tusks beneath the tundra, their image in the stories of those who came after. People remembered them not only as beasts of power, but as ancestors of wonder. Cave paintings still show them, vast, curved lines of ochre and charcoal drawn by hands that must have trembled with reverence. In those images, humans did not see enemies. They saw teachers, embodiments of endurance and grace. The extinction of the great mammals was the first time the Earth experienced humanity as a shaping force. It marked the beginning of what some call the Anthropocene, the human epoch. From that point on, our species no longer adapted to the planet's rhythms. It began to compose them. Forests were cleared, animals domesticated, fire used to sculpt landscapes. We had inherited the Earth, but we were still learning how to care for it. The balance that nature had practiced for billions of years was now in our hands, fragile and uncertain. And yet the disappearance of the giants left a quiet lesson that life is not a ladder of progress, but a field of adaptation. The largest are not the strongest, and the strongest are not the most enduring. Resilience belongs to those who can change. The mammoths had conquered the ice, but they could not survive its absence. The humans, small and curious, survived because they could imagine something different. In that imagination was both creation and danger, the power to shape the future for all. The world that followed was lighter. Birdsong replaced the rumble of herds. Forests replaced tundras. The air, freed from the cold, grew moist with rain and warmth. And from that gentle balance rose agriculture, civilization, art, the beginnings of everything that would follow. The age of giants was over, but it had cleared the way for the age of thought. Sometimes extinction is not punishment, but transition. It does not erase life, it refines it. The mammoths and their kin did not die in vain. Their passing opened the door to a new chapter of intelligence and consciousness. Through their loss, the Earth found a new kind of balance, not of muscle, but of mind. And still, the planet remembers them. In permafrost, their bodies sleep intact. In DNA, their stories still hum, the record of cold, of endurance, of quiet power. Science reads that code now like scripture, rediscovering what they once knew, that survival is patience, not conquest. And perhaps deep within our own instincts, some memory of that truth remains. The world that once echoed with the steps of giants now hums with electricity and language. But beneath it all, the same rhythm endures, the slow turning of a planet that has survived every change, every fire, every freeze. The silence left by the mammoths was not emptiness. It was space for a new kind of voice to emerge. And in that space, humanity began to speak. In the long memory of the Earth, every end has carried within it the pattern of renewal. From oceans of fire to continents of ice, from silence to song, the planet has followed one rule above all others: balance. Not perfection, not peace without movement, but balance as an ongoing act, a dance between creation and decay. It is the oldest rhythm the Earth knows. After every extinction, the scales tilt, tremble, and slowly settle again. Volcanoes feed the air, storms carry minerals back to the sea. Life, in countless small and patient forms, rebuilds what was lost. Even when the surface seems barren, the seeds of future forests sleep beneath the soil. Even when the air grows harsh, bacteria find a way to breathe it. This is not optimism, it is instinct. Life does not seek permanence, it seeks rhythm. The planet itself participates in this dance. Its crust shifts, its oceans circulate, its climate oscillates like the breath of a sleeping giant. Each motion corrects another. Each imbalance breeds its own solution. When heat builds, volcanoes release clouds that cool the sky. When cold deepens, greenhouse gases rise to trap warmth again. It is not a mind that governs these changes, but a pattern as intricate as thought, as ancient as gravity. For billions of years, this balance has allowed life not only to survive, but to evolve. Extinction clears the stage. Adaptation writes the next act. The coral that dies in one sea becomes limestone for the next. The forest that burns returns its nutrients to the soil. The predator that vanishes opens a path for the next evolution of grace. In this way, loss becomes function, and silence becomes possibility. If you look at the timeline of Earth from afar, it is not a steady line, but a pulse. Booms and collapses, explosions of diversity followed by sudden stillness. Each pulse lasts millions of years, so long that even continents change faces before the next beat. But to the planet, these are natural heartbeats, the rhythm by which it remembers and renews itself. Scientists once imagined evolution as a ladder, a climb from the simple to the complex, from the weak to the strong. But the Earth does not climb. It circles, it experiments, it forgets and relearns. Every extinction reminds life that there is no single summit, only endless adaptation. The simplest cell and the tallest tree share the same task, to endure change. And perhaps that endurance, not dominance, is what defines survival. Even the atmosphere remembers this lesson. When plants first filled the air with oxygen, they triggered mass death among the organisms that could not breathe it. It was one of the earliest extinctions, and yet it made possible everything that followed. The very air we inhale is the residue of crisis turned into balance. The ocean's salt is another archive, the minerals washed down from mountains over eons, creating a chemistry that sustains all life within it. Everything alive today is a survivor of not one, but countless extinctions, descendants of those who found a way through each collapse. Balance does not mean stillness. The Earth's calm is never empty. It is full of motion so slow that we call it peace. The rotation of the planet, the drift of continents, the turning of the moon, all these forces weave together the conditions that let life continue. And when the balance shifts too far, it is restored not by miracle, but by consequence. The world self-corrects because correction is its nature. Even humanity, with all its fire and noise, is part of this ancient mechanism. We alter the air, reshape the land, flood valleys, cut forests, and the earth responds. The oceans absorb, the winds redistribute, the ecosystems adjust. It is not punishment. It is the same rhythm that followed every age before us. If the scales tip too far, life will change again, perhaps without us, perhaps through us. But the balance will return. Sometimes balance takes the form of beauty. A coral reef growing over volcanic rock, a glacier feeding a green valley, ash becoming soil. Each is a reconciliation of opposites, fire and water, death and birth. The world does not avoid contrast, it relies on it. The dance between destruction and creation is what keeps it alive. Look at the forests that grow on lava fields in Hawaii. They are not exceptions, they are the rule. Life moves into ruins because ruins are full of promise. Minerals, light, space, everything a new seed could want. In the aftermath of every cataclysm, the earth writes the same phrase again. Begin again. Even extinction, for all its weight, is not chaos but structure. It is pruning on a cosmic scale. Too much stability and life stagnates. Too much change and it shatters. The line between them is narrow, but the earth has learned to walk it with grace. We are the children of that grace, balanced between fire and frost, between sea and sky. To live on this planet is to live inside a conversation between loss and renewal. The forests breathe out what we breathe in. The rain that falls into rivers once flowed through mountains and bones. Even the dust that settles on your window may contain atoms from ancient seas. Everything recycles. Nothing truly vanishes. It only changes form, waiting to return. This, perhaps, is what makes the earth peaceful even in its violence. It does not destroy to punish, nor renew to reward. It simply continues, endlessly refining its own harmony. Each extinction, each rebirth, each rise and fall of temperature is a note in the same long melody. And the melody is not sad. It is vast, slow, and endlessly patient. If we could hear that song, if we could listen beyond the scale of our own lives, it might sound like waves rolling across eons, a whisper of wind through continents, the pulse of magma beneath the crust, the cry of the first bird, the last echo of a glacier breaking into sea. It would sound like a planet remembering itself. And in that remembrance lies the oldest truth. The earth is not fragile, it is balanced. Delicate, yes, but deliberate. It endures because it moves, not because it resists. It survives not by keeping things the same, but by letting them change. Balance is not perfection, it is patience. And patience on this world has always meant life. The story of extinction did not end in the ancient past. It continues still, quietly, steadily, beneath the hum of cities and the rhythm of machines. The Earth, once shaped by asteroids and ice, is now being reshaped by thought, by choice, by consequence. The new force is not cosmic nor volcanic, but human. In this age, species vanish not from fire in the sky, but from the warmth of our own making. Forests recede beneath fields and roads, rivers are dammed, mountains mined, oceans filled with light and noise. The air thickens again, not with ash, but with carbon, a gas invisible yet heavy with memory. The balance that the Earth spent millions of years refining begins once more to tremble. Scientists call it the sixth extinction, but the planet does not use such words. To the Earth, it is simply another turning of the wheel, one more moment when equilibrium must be restored. And yet this time is different. For the first time, the agent of change knows what it is doing. Humanity can see the consequences of its own touch. The world's mirrors, satellites, telescopes, instruments buried in ice reflect back what we have become. It is not a story of villains and victims. It is a story of momentum. Every field we till, every city we light, every ship that crosses the sea changes the equation of energy and matter. In the grand scheme, it is small, almost imperceptible. But over centuries, the accumulation becomes tectonic. The Earth feels the weight of billions of decisions, all small, all constant. And just as before, in the Devonian seas, in the Permian heat, in the shadow of the asteroid, balance begins to shift. Species vanish in silence. A frog that once sang in the rain is gone. A coral reef that once glowed beneath turquoise water turns bone white. A glacier that reflected sunlight into the sky melts, and the ocean rises by the width of a hand. Each of these moments feels small. Together, they form a pattern. It is not apocalypse, it is arithmetic. And yet, within this arithmetic, there is still grace, because unlike the asteroid, unlike the volcano, humanity can choose. Awareness is a new force of nature. It means the Earth, through us, has become conscious of itself. We are the first species to record the planet's temperature, to trace its carbon, to name its vanishing creatures. We can see what is happening, and that alone changes the story. If you look closely, renewal is already beginning. Forests regrow on abandoned land. Rivers, once dammed, are being freed. Species thought lost are found again in quiet corners, small, resilient survivors of our noise. Wind turns turbines, sunlight feeds glass panels, cities plant gardens on their roofs. It is still imbalance, yes, but an imbalance aware of its own existence. An awareness, as evolution has always shown, is the first step toward adaptation. Perhaps the Earth has always moved toward consciousness. Each extinction, each rebirth pushed life toward greater awareness. The first bacteria responded to light. The first fish learned to see. The first mammals learned to care. And now, one species looks at the entire planet and wonders if it can protect what it loves. That question, fragile as it is, might be the most powerful adaptation yet. In the quiet of laboratories and research stations, people study the air and the ocean not out of fear, but out of reverence. They measure the melting of ice sheets, the migration of birds, the patterns of rainfall. They speak not of domination, but of stewardship. For perhaps the greatest lesson the earth has ever taught is that power without humility always ends in silence. And humility, like balance, can be learned. If you could see the planet from afar, from the orbit of the moon, you would not see despair. You would see motion. Storms swirl and fade. Ice grows and recedes. Continents breathe in green and exhale to brown with the passing seasons. The earth is still beautiful, still alive, still learning how to carry what it has created. And perhaps we are part of that learning. Extinction has always been a teacher, not a curse. It reminds us that nothing is fixed, that survival demands movement, and that the smallest adjustments can shift the course of eternity. The world does not ask us to be perfect, only to participate in its rhythm, to act with the same patience it has always shown. When we restore a forest, we echo the regrowth that followed every cataclysm. When we protect a species, we continue the ancient work of balance. When we pause to look at the stars, we remember that we are temporary but not meaningless. The sixth extinction is not yet finished. Its outcome is unwritten. The Earth has survived worse, but this time, survival could be shared, an act of cooperation rather than reaction. For the first time, the planet's consciousness and its biology are one and the same. What we decide becomes what the Earth becomes. The boundary between us and it has dissolved. In this light, even loss takes on a quieter tone. The melting ice is not an ending, it is a mirror. The storms, the droughts, the changes, they are reminders that we are still part of the cycle. The same forces that shaped the first continents, that raised and erased mountains, that wrote the language of extinction, they flow through us now in industry, in intention, in invention. We are not outside of nature. We are its continuation, its experiment in awareness. And if awareness leads to care, then perhaps this extinction will be different. Perhaps the Earth, through us, will learn to prevent the next one. Perhaps the same species that once hunted mammoths to silence will now plant forests where none stand. Perhaps the same hands that dug coal will lift sunlight into motion. Change has always been the law. Only the direction is new. Every era has left a trace, iridium in the rocks, ice in the soil, fossils in the dust. Ours will leave its mark too, plastic, radiation, carbon, glass. But maybe among those traces, there will also be forests grown from forgotten seeds, oceans made cleaner, animals returned to their paths. Maybe the mark of our age will be not only destruction, but reflection. The planet has never demanded innocence, only memory. We are the first species capable of remembering everything. And if we remember well, perhaps we will learn to live gently within the cycle rather than above it. For even now, as glaciers melt and forests burn, somewhere coral grows again. Somewhere a whale sings in a newly quiet sea. Somewhere, a seed buried by the last mammoth waits for spring. The earth endures not because it resists change, but because it allows it. And we too must learn to do the same, not to fight the world's rhythm, but to play in time with it. The future will not be still, but it can be balanced. And in that balance, perhaps, peace will return. One day, long after our cities have faded into dust, the earth will still be turning. The continents will drift a little farther apart, the seas will carve new shapes into their edges, and the air will carry no memory of our noise. It will be quieter, not empty, but calm. For the first time in many thousands of years, the planet will breathe without the hum of engines, without the constant rearrangement of its surface by restless hands. And yet we will not be gone entirely. Our presence will linger, folded into the earth's new skin. Concrete will crumble, but its dust will feed the soil. Steel will rust into the red of rivers. Glass will melt back into sand. Even plastic, though slow to yield, will eventually become something else, woven into sediment, buried, softened by time. Humanity will not vanish. It will become a texture, a layer in the planet's memory. Future strata will bear our signature, a thin horizon of artificial minerals, a glint of forgotten civilization beneath layers of stone and clay. And above that layer, new forests will grow. Roots will pierce old foundations, splitting streets and reclaiming walls. Seeds carried by wind will find homes in the cracks of what was once human geometry. Vines will weave over towers, turning glass to green. The air, once heavy with smoke, will clear again, and the cycle of weather will find its ancient rhythm. Rain will fall, not on rooftops, but on leaves, on moss, on new beginnings. In the oceans, coral will return where warmth allows it. Reefs will form around the remnants of ships and cities now submerged, human ruins transformed into nursery grounds for life. Fish will move through window frames, whales will sing between forgotten bridges, and the sea will write new patterns on the bones of our monuments. The plastic that once drifted on the waves will sink into silt and become part of the geological story, inert and folded into the seabed. Even our harm will be repurposed by time. The atmosphere, too, will heal. The excess carbon will be drawn slowly back into stone and ocean. Plants will reclaim what we released, locking it again into wood and soil. The air will grow lighter, clearer, and once more aligned with the breath of balance. It will take tens of thousands of years, a long exhale for a planet, but the Earth has always known how to wait. And as the centuries pass, evolution will begin its quiet work again. From the survivors of our age, the birds, the insects, the seeds, new forms will emerge. Creatures will adapt to the altered chemistry, to the reshaped continents, to the temperatures we have left behind. They will fill every niche as they always have. Perhaps a new intelligence will rise, not like ours, but in harmony with the pulse of the world. Perhaps thought will return in another shape, one that listens more deeply than it speaks. Even without us, the planet will continue to dream. Volcanoes will build mountains where there were plains. Glaciers will come and go again. Rivers will change course. Deserts will bloom, and the continents will meet once more in some far future. Time will stretch and curl, and each age will leave its trace in stone. The earth will remember us as it remembers the ammonites, the trilobites, the dinosaurs, not as mistakes, but as chapters, temporary, necessary, and complete. The world after humanity will not be a wasteland. It will be renewal. The silence will not be grief, but recovery. Every end on this planet has always been followed by color, by sound, by movement. If the forests could speak, they would not curse what came before. They would simply grow through it, turning loss into soil. Imagine walking through that far future world, if walking were still possible. You might find the curve of a road beneath moss, the shape of a building softened into a hill, the hint of letters on a stone half swallowed by lichen. The wind would move through the gaps in what was once glass, and the sound would be like breathing. Birds, descended from survivors of cities, would nest in the open shells of skyscrapers. The air would smell of rain, not smoke. Everything that once belonged to us would belong again to the world, and deep underground the memory of our time would persist. Our metals, our plastics, our bones, all pressed into the language of geology. Perhaps in some unimaginable future, another species would read that record as we read fossils now. They would see a sudden bloom of strange materials, a pulse of carbon, a quick flare of complexity, and then quiet. They would wonder what we were, how we lived, what we learned, and in their wondering we would live again as echoes, peaceful, instructive, complete. The earth does not mourn, it remembers. It folds everything into its endless cycle and makes something new. Even extinction, even collapse, becomes sediment, becomes pattern. In this way, nothing is truly lost. Everything becomes part of something larger, something slower, something more whole. Perhaps one day the world will be warm again, as it was in its youth. Or perhaps it will freeze, blanketed by ice and silence. Either way, it will endure. The sky will change color, the stars will shift, the continents will drift toward reunion, the earth's pulse will go on, steady and deep. And in that pulse, the memory of our laughter, our light, our stories will hum like a faint note in a great chord. We may not be eternal, but we are part of eternity. Our atoms, our creations, our mistakes, all will dissolve back into the living fabric of the world. And the earth, having carried us through our brief, bright age, will continue to turn, patient, renewed, alive. Every extinction, even ours, is a return, a transformation, not an erasure. The planet does not seek to forget, it seeks to integrate. It takes what was and reshapes it into what will be. The peace that follows, our absence will not be lonely. It will be balanced. For in the end, the earth has never needed us to survive. But perhaps, through us, it has learned a little more about itself, about awareness, about care, about impermanence. And that lesson, like every fossil, will last longer than we ever could. When the dust of every age has settled, what remains is not the ruins, but the rhythm. The earth has never been defined by what it loses, only by what it becomes after. For billions of years, it has known one truth: life always returns, though never in the same shape, never by the same path. The world is not a circle that repeats perfectly. It is a spiral, ascending through time, revisiting the same melodies, but with new harmonies each turn. Somewhere far in the future, long after our species has turned to myth, the planet will still glow under its quiet sun. New forests will breathe where cities once stood. New oceans will whisper across lands that once held deserts. New creatures will walk and swim and fly, built from the same old atoms that once built us. They will inherit the chemistry of our breath, the minerals of our bones, the echoes of our choices. And though they will never know our names, they will live because we once lived. In the deep time of the earth, nothing is ever wasted. Every molecule that burns returns to the air. Every stone that falls becomes soil. Every silence becomes the space where a new sound can form. Extinction, seen from within the short window of a lifetime, feels like an ending. But from the planet's perspective, it is just a breath, an exhale before the next inhale of creation. If you could listen to the earth not through the noise of a single age, but through the scale of eons, you would hear it breathing. the pulse of magma beneath the crust, the slow murmur of the oceans, and the faint vibration of ice cracking at the poles, all of it part of the same quiet heartbeat. It is not a rhythm of despair, but of patience. And patience on this planet has always meant survival. Every extinction has left behind more than absence. It has left information, lessons encoded in rock, in air, in the genetic memory of the survivors. The planet learns through its losses. It does not forget the heat of the Permian or the shadow of the asteroid. It carries them forward as wisdom, refining the way it balances life and change. In that sense, Earth is a teacher, not of endurance, but of transformation. From the first microbes that breathed without oxygen, to the first creatures that walked on land, to the first mind that looked back at the stars and wondered why, every step has been guided by the same pattern: adapt or yield, and in either case, continue. Life is not stubborn, it is fluid. It knows when to flow around obstacles and when to wait for the tide to change. And in that waiting, it gathers strength. Even silence has its role. When the seas went still, they incubated new beginnings. When the air, grew dark, it sheltered what light could endure. When the ice descended, it taught warmth the value of persistence. Every pause in the world's story is a preparation for the next movement. The stillness after loss is never empty. It is full of unseen growth. Perhaps this is the most peaceful truth of all, that the universe does not hurry. Stars collapse, galaxies drift, planets freeze and thaw, and all the while something within them is learning to become. The Earth is a single thread in that cosmic tapestry, fragile, yes, but luminous in its persistence, and within it, life continues to compose its music, note by note, extinction by extinction, rebirth by rebirth. If another civilization ever rises here, whether born of new minds or of something entirely unfamiliar, it will inherit not only the materials of our world, but its wisdom. It will learn that chaos is temporary, that beauty is cyclical, that time does not erase but transforms. It will see fossils in the stone and realize that every shape, every form, every era is both an ending and an invitation. It will feel the warmth of the sun and understand that even the star itself will one day fade, and yet the light it gave will echo in all that grew beneath it. The peace that follows extinction is not silence, but balance restored. After every storm, the air becomes clearer. After every collapse, the soil grows richer. Even the smallest seed carried by wind or water holds the map of a forest waiting to return. This is the pattern that holds the earth together. Not perfection, not permanence, but renewal. And maybe that is the lesson we were meant to learn in our short, bright age. Not how to dominate, but how to participate. Not how to conquer, but how to listen. To understand that survival is not control. It is cooperation with change. To see that the world's peace was never about stillness, but about rhythm. Every sound we ever made, the music, the words, the hum of machines, will one day dissolve into that rhythm. It will not vanish. It will blend. The earth's pulse will absorb it, soften it, and carry it forward as part of its song. Even our mistakes, when stretched across eons, will become texture, not tragedy. For in the language of deep time, every echo is forgiven. If the earth could speak, perhaps it would say this: "You were never separate from me. You were my thought, my experiment in awareness, my reflection made of flesh. You rose from my oceans, built from my minerals, and you will return to them. Do not fear the return. It is not loss, it is reunion." And so the cycle will close, only to open again. The planet will continue to turn in the quiet grace of its orbit, cradling whatever new life may come. The stars will shift their constellations, the oceans will hum their endless lullabies, and time will go on composing its music of becoming. The end of the world, when it comes, will not be destruction. It will be transformation. One more breath in the long exhale of creation. The earth will find its balance, as it always has. And in that balance, the story of every extinction, every rebirth, every echo will merge into a single truth. Nothing truly ends. Everything returns. Peace is not the absence of change, it is change understood. Whole ecosystems vanished. Coral reefs, which had thrived for hundreds of millions of years, collapsed and did not return for tens of millions more. Fish that had just begun to explore the open ocean died out, their bones becoming quiet fossils in the silt. Plants continued to grow on land, drawing carbon from the air, perhaps even deepening the imbalance. The planet itself was learning, through chaos, how to breathe. Extinction is often imagined as violence, as a single cataclysm, a meteor strike, a volcanic roar. But most of them happen slowly. They unfold like long winters, not with screams, but with a sigh. Species fade not because they are weak, but because the world changes faster than they can adapt. For every creature that disappears, another waits quietly, ready to fill the space left behind. The Devonian silence was not the end. It was a pause, a deep breath before the next verse. After the silence, new shapes began to stir in the shallows. Fish with stronger fins, lungs that could taste the air, eyes that could look at the sun. Life began to walk. Amphibians, the first travelers between water and land, crept from the sea's edge into the humid forests. They carried in their blood the memory of oceans, and in their hearts the rhythm of tides. Each step was a quiet defiance of extinction, each breath a promise that the story would continue. The earth had changed, but it had not forgotten how to nurture. Volcanoes cooled, skies cleared, rivers carried new minerals to the sea, feeding plankton, which fed fish, which fed the first land predators. In the soil, roots deepened, stabilizing what had once been barren ground. And in the silence left by old life, new voices began to sing, insects buzzing, amphibians calling, leaves whispering in the wind. The planet, though scarred, was still alive. Every extinction is also an act of renewal. It prunes, reshapes, and forces life to evolve. Without the Devonian collapse, perhaps no creature would have dared to leave the sea. Perhaps we would not exist at all. The world's history is not a straight line, but a spiral, each fall bringing a rise, each loss a transformation. In the rock layers of that time, the story is still written. Dark bands of shale mark oceans starved of oxygen, fossilized corals end abruptly, their skeletons replaced by iron-rich silt. Then, slowly, new lines appear, layers filled with the bones of different creatures, strange and unfamiliar. They are the survivors, and their descendants in time will become everything we know. If you could walk the earth then, it would feel heavy, humid, full of unspent heat. The land smelled of wet, stone, and moss. The air trembled with the weight of transformation. In the distance, volcanoes breathed thin streams of smoke into the sky, and the rivers shimmered with life finding its way again. The forests were not yet tall, but they were persistent. Even as sunlight struggled through the haze, green continued to reach upward, chasing the light. Somewhere in those shadows, the first reptiles began to stir, small, fragile, cautious. They laid eggs on dry land, safe from the drowning seas. It was an innovation born from necessity, a lesson taught by extinction itself. To survive, life had to learn distance, to separate from the old and step into the unknown. And so it did. The world was beginning its next chapter. The first extinction had taught Earth a kind of wisdom. It learned that abundance can lead to imbalance, that life must adjust or vanish. It learned that even destruction can hold the seed of creation. In every collapse since, the planet has followed the same rhythm: upheaval, stillness, renewal. Each time the echo is softer, the adaptation faster, the rebirth more complex. If you listen closely to the rock, the message is clear. Extinction is not failure, but evolution's quiet reset. The Devonian silence was not the world's end. It was its meditation, a long, deep pause between breaths. And from that silence rose lungs, forests, and the first heartbeat that ever sounded on land. The Earth had learned how to start again,